A former U.S. Secretary of Labor is criticizing Donald Trump's trade policy. Robert Reich, who served under President Bill Clinton, says Trump's tariffs are hurtful to American businesses. Here's what else he told our colleague Rosemary Barton earlier today.
I think it's likely that he's looking for an off-ramp because the 145% tariff that he is putting on China right now effectively decouples the two economies. And also, China has responded with its own 125% tariff on American goods. He is looking for ways to de-escalate because he knows that decoupling the two economies really will hurt the U.S. economy dramatically. It has already taken its toll on the stock market. It has hurt bond markets. Essentially, global companies that are headquartered in America, there are no totally American companies, if they're big companies. They do a lot of their manufacturing. They get a lot of their components. They do a lot of their assembling in China. They need the Chinese market.
Now, as you just heard from Robert Reich, many global companies rely on manufacturing and assembly overseas. That is especially true in the fashion industry, where Canadian brands often source and produce clothing abroad. For many of those workers in those factories, particularly women, these jobs are a vital source of income. To talk more about what's at stake for them, we're joined now by Jason Judd. He's the Executive Director of Global Labor Institute at Cornell University. Jason, thank you very much for making time for us today.
Sure. Thanks, Natasha.
Jason, I'm very interested in this topic because we talk so much about electronics manufacturing and auto manufacturing, but this massive industry that we all need to wear clothes, which is dominated by women in Asia manufacturing these clothes, is not getting as much attention. And I just wonder, what would happen if those reciprocal tariffs that Donald Trump had threatened a few weeks ago of 35, 45, 55% on Vietnam, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka went into effect, what that would do to the clothing manufacturing industry in South Asia and East Asia?
Well, first it might mean, we've already seen that it means buyers of those goods, think Lululemon, H&M, Costco, Nike, asking their suppliers to reduce prices for orders already placed and to reduce prices for orders that those buyers might be bringing to them in the near future. That's the first reaction. The second might be to cancel orders in places where these high tariffs would take effect. Now, the pause is on, but in July we may see places like Cambodia, Vietnam, Bangladesh, all places where apparel and footwear destined for the U.S. and the North American markets come from, see canceled orders. And that would mean that the tens of millions of workers, as you said, many of them women, will face job losses. And for those who are able to hold on to their jobs, fewer orders means lower prices, and that means a squeeze on wages. So workers in these places are in real trouble, whether they're facing the loss of their jobs or simply a squeeze on their incomes, and their employers too face a squeeze, as do the governments that rely on the export earnings to fuel their budgets.
Jason, when we often talk about clothing manufacturing in Asian countries, we talk about sweatshops and we talk about abuse of laborers, and that can oftentimes be the case. But for many women, this has been an opportunity to get their families out of poverty and give them an opportunity to work outside of the home that isn't domestic servitude. I mean, if you can help give a Western audience a sense of how significant a boost this industry is for Asian women.
Yeah. Well, it's you're quite right that there are still, after decades, plenty of problems with these jobs. But economies and workforces and women facing the loss of tens of millions of these jobs, that would be devastating. And we've seen the role of women in these countries, think of Bangladesh or Pakistan, Cambodia, changing importantly over the last 30 years. We see participation, or the women's participation in the workforce jumping in places like Bangladesh. 30 years ago, it was about 24%. Today, it's 44%. In Pakistan, in 1990, it was 11%. And today, their participation rate is almost a quarter. And we've seen women become major earners in their household. We've seen them build and lead trade unions. We've seen them become supervisors and sometimes managers in these firms. So all of that is at risk. And there's a great risk, too, for their governments. Their economies have been built around the export of apparel. And this has been a time-tested way for the least developed countries to move into the ranks of middle income. And that, too, is threatened by these Trump tariffs.
Now, some have argued, including the president and members of his administration, that when it becomes too expensive to make things overseas, including our clothing, we can just make it here at home. And for this instance, he's meaning the United States. Is that an easy switch over?
No, it's wrong-headed to think that that high tariffs in places like Vietnam or Cambodia or Bangladesh or Honduras will drive apparel and footwear employment back to the U.S. The cost structures and the supply chains that have been built around these relatively low-wage economies would be very, very hard to shift. And fully automated apparel or footwear production in the U.S., which is what you need to be able to compete, isn't possible. So yes, not likely that this work, even in the near term, or rather in the medium term, is going to shift back to places like the United States.
And beyond not having the industry and infrastructure in place, what often gets lost, again, because it's women doing so much of this work, is that this is highly skilled labor. And in the Western world, we don't necessarily have masses of people who know how to make clothing. So let's say we did get to that point. So a pair of shoes that you would get in a store that's made overseas costs $100. What do you anticipate those pair of shoes would cost if they were made in the United States?
Well, gosh, there were a couple of experiments, one in the US, another in Germany, both relatively high-wage countries, attempts to fully or effectively automate shoe production. This was an experiment, an expensive investment made by Adidas 5-8 years ago. And both factories ended up closing because they were unable to compete, unable to produce shoes that were competitive with the costs of similar shoes made in places like China, Vietnam, and elsewhere.
What's going to happen to these economies if by June or at some point in the summer, the reciprocal tariffs do come into effect and millions of people, most of them women, end up losing their employment? Most of these factories end up closing. What is the ripple effect beyond the economic loss?
Well, there are two ways to imagine it. One is the short, sharp shock that we experienced in COVID, which was global, was general, and that led to canceled orders, that led to lost jobs, that led to billions of dollars in unpaid wages to workers at the supply end of the process. But the demand bounced back, and some of those jobs, some of that earning came back. That won't happen in places where these high tariffs are laid on. The apparel, the fashion industry will expect some reliability, some predictability, and they will move over time to places where the tariffs, where they expect the tariffs to remain lower, and they'll have to also shift their sales where they can to markets that are more reliable. The U.S. has demonstrated in these early Trump months to be an unreliable partner. The other way to look at it is as a reflection or seen through the lens of the climate crisis, which is relatively slow moving. And at Cornell, we developed a model to anticipate the losses in the apparel industry from climate breakdown. Think of the effects of intense heat and intense flooding. It reduces productivity, it reduces wages, earnings at the factory level. We studied 4 countries, including Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, Pakistan, all threatened by high tariffs, and they would lose tens of billions of dollars in the near term and hundreds of billions over the next 25 years if nothing is done to counteract the effects of the climate crisis. Now, this tariff crisis, this shock, will happen all at once. So you get the effect of 25 years worth of damage, loss in jobs, loss in earnings, happening in a very compressed way. Hard to imagine a good outcome.
Jason, Judd, it's been a real education. I really, really thank you for your time and for your insights.
Great. Thanks.